Hello, everyone. Ron Crandall here, Chief Integration Officer at USAdvisors Insurance. Thank you for tuning in. This is part 2 of the long-term care engaged planning conversation. If you have not yet watched part 1, I encourage you to do so. Shane Van Patten put that together. It does create very good context for this portion. With that said, I don't think you're required to watch part 1. If you're ready for part 2, I'm ready for you. So with that, just a little bit about me to get you to understand that I have indeed been out in front of clients for the last 17 years. It's only been the last year that I've been pulled primarily out of personal production to help coach and train other advisors to successfully and intentionally integrate insurance into their practice. To give you an idea, in 2016, the last year in personal production, I got more referrals than I had ever received at that point. It's not for me to impress you, but to impress upon you that what I'm going to walk you through here today is really my process. And I'm not suggesting that I have the best process, but I will tell you that my process does work. We have an implementation rate over 80%. What I want to do today is encourage you to simply take from me what you like and leave what you don't. And I'm offering you sort of one view at how we could successfully get this done. If this resonates with you, I would offer, again, to coach you more directly on a one-on-one basis to incorporate this kind of structure into your process. So what will we really be covering today? I mean, first and foremost, it's around having a real conversation. And you can't have a real conversation about insurance without the right context and tone. I know what the wrong context and tone is, which is, would you like any of that insurance? And of course, the answer to that is no. But our clients do want to see their goals met. Right? As indicated in part 1, our goal is really to make sure that they have a plan that allows us to stay safe in our home and to protect the spouse. In my opinion, that's the single most important thing out of all of this, is protecting the spouse who's not ill. That's really crucial. Furthermore, long-term care protection in some form or fashion is almost always appropriate when looked at in the right context. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then I'm going to spend the bulk of my time showing you how to conduct the first and the second meetings and do that in a palatable way. All right? Not by shoving illustrations forward and stacking them up a foot tall, but doing it in a methodical, palatable way that gives our clients the information that they need so that they can make a good decision for their family. And in order to do so, we really need to create the right perspective, right? It's not so much insurance. It's really the retirement portfolio protection. Now, some people have said to me, well, Rod, you're trying to hide from the fact that it's insurance, or maybe you're being shifty about it, and that's not the case. Okay? My personal belief is that if your client needs long-term care, your client is going to get long-term care. And if your client gets long-term care, it's going to cost them something. Okay? They're going to get the care they need, and it's going to cost them something. And if it costs them something, they're going to pay for it 100% out of pocket unless they have some long-term care insurance in place. And if you're paying for it directly out of your pocket, you're effectively paying full retail price for that care. But not only are you paying full retail price, you're actually paying full retail price plus, because we generally have to advance money from some sort of pocket and exercise or realize taxation in some form. So a lot of people say, well, my clients are self-insured, or they can self-insure, to which I say, absolutely, they can self-insure. But if they need care, that's the least effective mathematical way to do it. And so what we're really talking about here from a perspective standpoint is to create an umbrella above your assets, or possibly a safety net underneath. Shane alluded to it in part 1, but really at the end of the day, there's really only 2 options. They can keep all of their money and keep all of their risk and the consequences that come along with that. Or they can transfer some of their money, some of their risk, and some of the consequences be muted. Right? And if we have that kind of conversation, I think we can have a lot more success understanding what it is, what is my risk, and what does it cost. I would contend that if a long-term care event happens in your family or your client's family, 100% chance that it's an emotional catastrophe. In part one, Shane shared experience of him being in the sandwich generation and caring for both parents and kids at the same time. Okay, emotional catastrophe. Now, as advisors, we can certainly provide some emotional support, but really the best way we can be impactful is to make sure that we don't have a mathematical catastrophe at the exact same time as an emotional catastrophe. This is like standing out in your yard with a magnifying glass in the sun and just setting your whole yard on fire. And what's happening here is that people are ignoring this conversation and they haven't even checked the math. They didn't stress test the portfolio. They're just hoping it doesn't happen to them. And we really owe it to our clients and to our practice to, again, have this conversation in a meaningful and impactful and intentional way. Now, in order to do that, we generally want to have some field underwriting occurring before we go too deep into this discussion for really a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, if they're bona fidely uninsurable, we may not be able to do anything, and we're really sort of wasting the client's time and our time going down lanes that can't be fulfilled. Now, that happens occasionally, but what happens more often than not is that there may be some health concerns, and the more we understand what those are up front, the better off we are to determine what sort of options they have, because there's various structures for long-term care, some of which are underwritten exclusively for morbidity, some exclusively for mortality, and some a combination thereof. Then we have simplified issue products, etc. And so if we don't really understand what the health looks like, we can create inappropriate expectations for clients, and we can create a lot of work for ourselves and our staff and our partners by looking to solutions that cannot be presented or implemented. And so field underwriting can be sensitive, right? You've got to ask about their health. So what I've found over the last 17 years is that this is generally my methodology for health. Mr. and Mrs. Klein, are you as healthy as you look? I believe that that is the simplest question to start with. And candidly, the reason I think that's the case is it doesn't really matter how healthy they look, right? So are you as healthy as you look? 99 times out of 100, the answer to that is yes, to which I say that's great. Are there any concerns you're aware of? 99 times out of 100, well, no, not really. Well, maybe we have something, but it's usually no, not really. Once we get to this third question where they finally start opening up. Have you had any diagnoses, or are you on any prescription medication? It's been my experience that I usually have to go these three questions deep to get to the actual concern that might be sitting there. So just be aware of that, okay? And if a client seems uncomfortable with that, I generally acknowledge that. Listen, I'm very sorry I have to ask you these questions, but in order for me to really do the best job to determine what your options are, it really behooves me to understand where you sit. By the way, we have an underwriter on our staff that helps us select companies and products based upon the health of our clients. And so never forget that the insurance companies pay us a commission, but we really work for our clients. And so it behooves our clients and behooves us to really understand everything that we're dealing with so that we don't go into a recommendation and ultimately into underwriting when we don't have all the information. Okay? So once I have assessed that I believe that they're insurable to some degree, then in this first meeting, I'm helping them understand what long-term care insurance is. And my experience is that many clients believe that it's nursing home only coverage, which of course in years past that's been the case. And in fact, there's old policies out there that require confinement to nursing home. What I've got to tell you is I haven't made a recommendation for a nursing home only policy in 17 years. All of our structures and products allow us to have the care performed in our home, in an adult daycare facility, an assisted living facility, or at home. And I think when you really talk to clients, most would prefer to stay home. And so helping them understand that it doesn't require a confinement is crucial. So what we do then shift to is, how do we qualify? See, in a life insurance contract, it's very black and white. You're either alive or dead. And if you're dead, you get the benefit. Of course, you don't get it, your family does. Well, long-term care is a little more gray. Nearly all of these structures have two separate ways to qualify for care. The first is needing help with 2 or more of the 6 activities of daily living. And the second is the development of a cognitive impairment like Alzheimer's or dementia. And so I walk through that with the client. I ask them generally if they're familiar with activities of daily living. It appears that about 50% are and 50% aren't. What I generally say is, if you'll forgive me, I'll demonstrate to you how I fulfilled all 6 activities of daily living today. And before I do that, what is activities of daily living? It's really, in my opinion, an agreement between the government and insurance agencies or insurance companies on what the definition of maintaining an independent life is. And they've determined you need to do 6 things every day to be able to live independently. So again, Mr. and Mrs. Client, if you'll forgive me, I'll demonstrate how I've done this today. First thing I did when I woke up was I had to get myself out of bed. They call that transferring. That's number 1. Then I went into the restroom. And in order to make it to the restroom, I had to maintain my continence, which is number 2. Then I did my business, and I took care of my sanitary needs. That's number 3. I already asked for forgiveness, didn't I? Then I went ahead and got in the shower, number 4. Then I got dressed, number 5. Then I went downstairs and had some breakfast, number 6. So if I can prove that I need help with 2 or more of those 6 activities of daily living, or I develop a cognitive impairment, that is how I can ultimately qualify for the benefits in a long-term care policy. So if we understand that, Mr. and Mrs. Client, the next question should be, well, what are the benefits? And so those benefits come in usually 3 or 4 different varieties. I generally call them the 3 or 4 lane highway. Okay? And so in those, we've got different structures by which to transfer some of this risk. So if we know that we qualify, then we have to really consider 4 main moving parts inside of any long-term care structure. The first is, how long do we have to wait in order to get the care? It's often called the elimination period. You can think of it as a waiting period or even a deductible period. Then we have to determine what monthly benefit are we putting the insurance company on the hook for, right? We don't have to insure all of it. This is where a stress test on the portfolio comes in. You know, what could the portfolio withstand? What's the double dipping effect that occurs? But if we know that we have to pick how long we need to wait, then the next thing again is what monthly benefit. Then beyond that is for what duration of benefits. Are we just going to have this paid for 2 years, for 3 years, for 4 years, for 10 years, maybe for a lifetime? And then the fourth big moving part is the cost of living adjustment. Not all structures have that, but all things being equal, you're going to want cost of living adjustment. You're going to see that we're going to go through some examples for a 55-year-old client in just a minute here, and we're targeting a $3,000 monthly benefit today, which, depending where you are, might be 30 to 50% of the anticipated cost. Right? And there's no right answer here, but when we're talking about transferring risk, we have to figure out what do we have to give up in order to do that. And as Shane alluded to, a lot of people are over-quoting, and ideally everyone wants a Cadillac plan, I do. But what I found is that if we could transfer risk at no cost, all of my meetings would last 5 minutes. I would just shove paperwork, have them sign. Because it's my belief that nobody would accept a risk that they could transfer at no cost. But we can't really do that here, can we? And so that gets into what are our options. So conceptually speaking, I'm talking to clients in this first meeting about this 4-lane highway. The first of which is traditional long-term care. This is the only solution most clients believe exists. I call it the use it or lose it, pay-as-you-go plan. Now, that sounds negative, and in some ways it is. But I like traditional long-term care. And the main reason I like it is if we could fast forward in the future and know that your client was going to need care, I'm very confident that the best mathematical way to pay for that care would be buying traditional long-term care insurance. But in order for that to be true, a second thing is true, which is if we fast forward and we find out that your clients didn't need care and they passed away peacefully in their bed, they never needed long-term care, I can confidently tell you that this would be the worst mathematical decision that they've made because of the use it or lose it scenario. Okay? But big picture, I want you, the advisor here, to understand this. But again, we're in role play in the first meeting. I want the client to understand that I'm going to come back with a solution for traditional long-term care on a use it or lose it scenario. Okay? That's just lane one of the 3 or 4 lane highway. Okay? The second lane is a life insurance and long-term care combination plan. So if we're trying to target, say, $3,000 a month for 4 years in traditional coverage, there's no such thing as an apples-to-apples comparison, but we do the best that we can. And so on a life insurance policy, what that would look like is a $150,000 life policy. We would generally use a guaranteed universal life contract that was guaranteed to age 120 with a 2% long-term care rider, which would allow us to pull forward $3,000 a month for as long as 50 months. That's 50, because $3,000 a month times 50 months equals $150,000. And so what we have here is an asset of $150,000 that's either going to pay upon death $150,000, or for long-term care purposes $3,000 a month for 50 months, or a combination thereof. And so what clients like about that is that we have a known and guaranteed benefit amount. Now, anytime we're talking about guarantees, we know, of course, that they're guaranteed based on the claims paying ability of a company. And so not only do you want strong insurance companies overall for your clients, but certainly in long-term care insurance, which the trigger for the benefits is gray, right? Anytime you have a gray trigger, you want the insurance company's promise to be as high as possible. We have several mutual carriers and a lot of very well-rated insurance companies, high capitalized, very highly capitalized, et cetera. Okay, so the first lane is that traditional use it or lose it. The second lane is going to be a combination plan. Part of what they don't like about the combination plan is we can't adjust for inflation here. You're going to see this in my examples in a minute. And so what that means is if we want to buy a larger benefit in the future, what we really need to do is we need to buy a bigger policy to begin with. Okay? But again, my goal here, just to reiterate, is so that the client can understand big picture that there's 4 ways that we can go about doing this. And I want them to understand that for context, so in the second meeting, when I show them these lanes, they can be reminded what they are. Furthermore, if we talk about it at a big picture level, and I'm going into lane 3 with life insurance and long-term care combo, you might find, as I often do, that 1 or 2 of these structures is very unpalatable to the client. They just don't like it. I'd rather have them tell me that now so I don't have to go and do the research and pull together those numbers and figure out how that works for them. I do find that a lot of success in long-term care is about disqualifying the structures that they don't like and see which structures are still standing. And remember that thought when I move into the case studies in a minute. So lane 3 of the highway is a life insurance long-term combination on a lump sum basis. One of my favorite structures is a money guard structure. Right? It's a Lincoln money guard, and effectively this one-time lump sum creates 3 account values. You have your cash value. The structure I like most creates an 80% return of premium at all years. So if you change your mind, you can take 80% of your contribution back. If you never need long-term care and don't take the money back, it pays a death benefit. That death benefit might be, say, 20% higher than the contribution. so not huge leverage there. But it creates a third bucket, and that third bucket can be 2 to 5 times the contribution amount for the purpose of long-term care. Again, you're going to see this a little bit more clearly in the case study. But what people like about this structure is you just write one check, and you never have to pay premiums anymore. And so it's really a reallocation of the dollars that you already have, very likely coming from, say, a savings account or a CD, some sort of low interest rate environment usually. What people don't like about it is they have to write a pretty big check. It could be $50,000, $100,000, or maybe more. It might be the biggest check they ever wrote. Sometimes people go, well, wow, 75 grand is a lot of money. That costs a lot. Well, let's understand that when we're doing a lump sum approach, it isn't costing us the lump sum amount. What it's really costing us is the opportunity cost of where we pulled that money from, which again is why those that are more savers than investors or sit with a lot of cash, that cash is often earmarked for future generations and it's their emergency fund. And if that's the case, we can sometimes take part of that. And if it costs us 1% because that was in a 1% CD, well, that's a lot more palatable than pulling it out of the balanced portfolio at 7%. Right? There's no right or wrong answer here. It's just the conversation. By the way, the context, the most important part of the context is the financial plan. We need to show them how to pay for this. And some clients are better off paying as you go every year. Others are better off allocating money and being done with it. Yet others are better off scooping money off of the investment account to be able to pay for a policy. Okay, so there's definitely more than one way to slice this. For years, I've been told that the correct answer to every financial planning question, and by extension, the correct answer to every insurance planning question, is it depends. And it really does, and that comes through here as well. So on the three of the 4-lane highways, now we're moving to the fourth, which is an annuity and long-term care combination on a lump sum basis. I also have an example here, but what you'll see is this is a simplified way to get coverage, and we can double or triple our deposit amount for the purpose of long-term care over 72 months. And there's a lot less underwriting involved. And so some of those clients who may have a health concern that could either make them uninsurable or at least create pause in the underwriter's mind, we can move to an annuity type structure and maybe have better results. So again, tying back to how important it is to do the field underwriting. So what we've done so far is we've really conducted that first meeting by helping them understand what long-term care insurance is, what it isn't, how to look at it, retirement portfolio protection, giving them the executive summary snapshot on the 3 or 4 lanes. What I end up finding is we often don't present all 4 lanes. We present between 2 to 3, but it depends on the client, their risk tolerance, their portfolio, etc. In the Chicagoland area where I'm at, for example, a very average client for us would be 2 retired teachers with pensions between them totaling $140,000 a year, plus $300,000 or $400,000 in their retirement accounts besides. Well, that client's goals and their needs are going to be fundamentally different than somebody who has, say, $2 million in investable assets that's trying to create a $100,000 income with your help, but with no pension. So I only bring up those examples to indicate that every client's a little bit different, and that's why the financial plan is so important. So now we're moving into the second meeting, okay? And we're going to go ahead and make some recommendations here and talk about what their options really are at this point. And so Shane gave you some tips. I'm going to give you some tips. Here are my recommendations. First and foremost, do not lead with illustrations. Now, don't mistake me here. I'm not saying you shouldn't run illustrations, and I'm not saying you shouldn't bring illustrations, and I'm not saying you shouldn't show illustrations. What I am saying is do not lead with illustrations. Okay, anecdotally, but it really happened. I had two widows come into the same wealth advisor's office who brought me in to help them with long-term care. Both of these widows, without exaggerating, were desperate to buy long-term care. They both wanted it, and they wanted it now. Both of them had met with 3 other agents in the past, and both of them said the same thing to me. Listen, I know I need this stuff. I don't know if I can afford it, and I don't even know what is up. I have stacks of these illustrations, and I can't make heads or tails of them. And it's my belief that agents are out there saying, you want to buy this, or would you like to buy this? Would you like to buy this? And they're not creating the context, they're not having the conversation, and it's getting people very confused. Do you think insurance companies want to make it easy to compare their product to the competition's product? No, and it's not easy, and clients get very confused. Keep the illustrations in your file. Believe me, please. And that leads to number 2 here. Use a one-page summary. I'm going to show you in this format. You can't see my actual page, but I'm breaking down the one-page summary, which is executive summary level. Okay, for them to say no, and then for us to qualify and go deeper. Okay, and that's really what number 3 is saying. When you show them 3 or 4 options, I think a couple things happen. Number 1, you're shifting the question, the fundamental question, from should I put insurance in place or not, to which of these structures should I put in place. That is not a small distinction. Secondarily, when you go around the world, I like to call it, with these different options, you have trade-offs, just like everything in life. And by understanding another option, it helps us make a better decision for ourselves. And then the third thing to describe there is I also use that so that we can literally put an X through the structures that we don't want to consider anymore. So we can move them from the table, okay, so that we can guide our client into a decision-making process. Okay. The fourth thing here, present premiums as percentage of income or net worth. Again, I'm not trying to be shifty, okay, but the fact of the matter is people don't want insurance, and they definitely don't want to pay for it. And no matter what premium you put on that page, it's too much money. I believe that. Which is why we shouldn't be leading with premiums. We should be bringing the premiums in only after we've set the right context and understand that this is about them fulfilling their financial plan. And by the way, $4,000 annually, if that's the number, if that represents only 3 or 4% of the income, well, maybe that's not so big. If it represents 0.1% of the assets under management, maybe that's not so big. But any hard number is going to be big. So these are my tips. Then finally, present the options as a unit, right? The fact is that I could run, without exaggerating, 100 different iterations for any given client right now. All that's going to do is inundate my staff and my partners and confuse the clients, and it's going to confuse myself as well. And so by sticking to the executive summary and looking at it as a unit, and we're talking conceptually, we can take that unit and double it up, we can cut it in half, and now we're really being the leaders that we need to by taking this complicated subject and distilling it into a process that's palatable for our clients. So with that, we're going to go into the one-pager. Again, ideally, you would see just literally a Word document, 1 page. You're going to see I have this broken down into 4 screens, I think, possibly 5. I want you to envision this all on 1 sheet of paper, right? The client that we're dealing with here is a 55-year-old couple on track for retirement and serious about planning. Okay. By the way, anyone who's not serious about planning isn't going to resonate with long-term care protection because they're going to see the premium and they're going to go, I don't want that premium. I'd rather be on the beach in Cabo. Not that I wouldn't. Of course, I'm a believer that I want to do both. I want to be on the beach and I want to protect my family. Okay. So for this 55-year-old couple, the first of the 4-lane highway is traditional long-term care. Well, Mutual of Omaha is very competitive today. What we ran was a $3,000 monthly benefit with 8 years shared between them. So they both have a policy, 4 years each, but they have a shared care rider attached that allows them to dip into the other person's bucket if they need it. Okay? Any one spouse can take 7 years. So if they go through their own 4 years and then into the spouses, they have to leave 1 year left for the other spouse. 3% cost of living adjustment. This is really important, as we discussed before. The math on that is about every 24 years, the original benefit is going to double. So these clients are 55. If we go out 24 years from now, they're going to be pushing 80, much more likely to need long-term care then than now. And at that point, they would have $6,000 monthly benefit for 8 years, right? Now remember, we're talking about retirement portfolio protection. So if we take $3,000 a month times 12 months times 8 years, what you have is $288,000 of total protection today that we were able to transfer to the insurance company. And what does that $288,000 represent? It represents an umbrella above our assets or a safety net below them. What does it cost us? Well, you can see Mr. was $1,289, Mrs. was $2,196 for a total combined premium of almost $3,500 annual. Now, this is a use it or lose it pay-as-you-go plan, right? So that means that we could pay for 30 years and pay $34.86 for 30 years and put in almost $105,000 into this plan. Not a small number. Now, if we put $105,000 in this plan and then we have a bucket of benefits nearly $600,000 at that time, that sounds to me like a 6-to-1 leverage point. And that's illustrating the fact that if we knew you'd need long-term care, this would absolutely be the structure I'd be recommending because we get the biggest bang for our buck. The issue, of course, is if we don't use it, we lose it. The insurance company keeps our $105,000. Not to mention, the insurance companies won't guarantee that these premiums will stay level. Okay, and when an insurance company won't guarantee you that the premiums will stay level, I believe they might as well be guaranteeing you that the premiums will go up. So if a client does implement this with me, I generally recommend that they accept and expect an increase of at least 25% over time. Okay, so every structure has trade-offs, and that, in my opinion, is the trade-off here. We might not need it, they could raise our rates. Okay. So then we move into the second. Okay, so the second scenario is this life insurance and long-term care combination plan. Nationwide's got a wonderful plan. What we have here is, again, a guaranteed universal life contract that's guaranteed out to age 120 with a 2% long-term care rider that allows us to advance $3,000 a month for as long as 50 months. Okay? Fully guaranteed by Nationwide. You can see that the total premium is $55.11 annually for the both of them. Is that a good deal or a bad deal? Well, what do clients like? They like that everything on this page is fully guaranteed if they get approved via underwriting. By the way, these are standard non-smoker rates. Okay. What they like is they've got a $150,000 value for both of them, no matter what. So if we go out 30 years again, just like we said before, if we go out 30 years and we pay $55.11 for 30 years, and then we die, we've paid in $165,000 into that plan. But through the death benefit, then we get $300,000 paid back out. And that's what people like about this, is they know that their money isn't going to be wasted. Now, alternatively, if they need long-term care, how big is their bucket 30 years from now? $130,000, make that $150,000 each, right? So $300,000. The bucket in lane one was twice that because of inflation protection, right? So now you can start to see the trade-off, and you can start to see why the premium's a little bit higher here, because the insurance company's going to pay. We just don't know when or how. And so we look at internal rates of return. Right, I have 25, 30, and 35-year returns here. They never need the long-term care, even after 35 years. You go out 35 years and they never need the care. He has a 1.85% internal rate of return. She has 2.85%. What does that mean? That means that that is a guaranteed, non-correlated, and income tax-free return to the heirs. Do I believe that a 1.85 guaranteed, non-correlated, and income tax return to the heirs is a stellar return? The answer is no, I don't. And in fact, if we had the crystal ball and we knew that this is what would happen, we get out 35 years and die, I wouldn't recommend it goes here. But do I believe then if your client had this in place and they live 35 years and die, do I believe that they made an egregious mathematical error? And the answer here is no. Not only did they get all their money back, but they got it all back. That 285 number, now that one's pretty good when you start thinking about taxes and what the taxable equivalent yield is, and understand that this is a guaranteed value. And in fairness, something could happen earlier, right? Not everybody lives that long. Look at those returns at 25 years. I didn't even run the 20-year return. What about the 1-year return? Listen, I'm an optimist, but some people are going to put life insurance in place or a structure like this in place, and they're going to pass away the next day. I hope it's not any of our clients, but it happens. It has happened and it will happen. And let's never forget that if that does happen, mathematically, that would be the best mathematical return of their entire life. So again, having context around these things does make a very big difference. Let's move to the next structure. So here's that money guide structure. Now note that I'm targeting $3,000 a month, but understand that it's impossible to create apples to apples. So I'm getting as close as I can. So this structure allows for $3,000 a month for 4 years. There's that 3% cost of living adjustment. That's really great. Our 80% return of premium in all years, just like I described. Okay. Total contributions, $103,601. So again, that $100,000, if it's coming from the 1% CD, is costing $1,000 a year or less. How much was the traditional long-term care coverage? Right? Maybe it makes sense for them to earmark this $100,000 and give it to Lincoln. But guess what? Maybe that $100,000 should stay in the assets under management or get there because it's probably in a savings account. Maybe with your help, you could target a more modest portfolio and try to target a 4 or 5% return, right? And be able to scoop some of that interest to buy the traditional long-term care. Right? What my experience is that when I've been brought in at point of sale, at the end of the day, the clients want to know two things. They want to look at their advisor and say, can I afford this? And the advisor say, yes, you can. And then how will I afford it? We need to find the money, right? How are we going to fund it? Clients often think that the only way to fund insurance is to increase your monthly cash flow. And that's just not the case. So that's what I want you to hear about this. Okay, and I really like this structure because I believe that anecdotally when you're 84 and 85 and 86 and 87, I think it gets increasingly hard to write another check to the insurance company. And if they're in a use it or lose it scenario and they're 86 and they said, you know what, I don't need this anymore, and they don't write the check, all of their benefits go away. And that does concern me. And so those are the kind of conversations that we're having with the clients. Okay, so the bottom of this page, so remember this was all one-pagers for the 55-year-olds. Now you might notice that I don't have an annuity structure. That's coming next. Annuity structure really wasn't appropriate for these clients in our opinion, so we just ran a 70 or 75-year-old woman and show you how that works. Okay. But there's things to note is on that one pager. And those things to note are that all of these pricing is subject to underwriting. And that the benefits and costs are pretty linear. And so again, I'm using this one pager and going and describing a 3 or 4 lane highway. What happens almost every time is by the end of this meeting, we're only considering 1 or 2 lanes. Almost never have the clients been able to make a decision in the second meeting. I do wish that they could have everything they need in the second meeting, but it often takes 3 meetings and sometimes 4 total meetings for them to put this in place. But again, my success rate has been over 80% when using this process. So again, I would encourage you to take what you like and leave what you don't. So here's that other structure to keep in mind. So Global Atlantic has a product called a 4-tier. And this really works well by repositioning dollars, generally designed for those clients that may not be in as good of health as we would want them to be to qualify for a traditional product. And so what's nice here is that this particular product has a 9-year surrender schedule that allows you to have your money back after 9 years on a guaranteed basis. Okay, depending upon how you answer 10 medical questions and a 15-minute phone history interview determines whether your $100,000 gets leveraged up to $200,000 or whether it gets leveraged up to $300,000. Okay, so on day one, if you qualify at 3 times leverage, $100,000 becomes $300,000, but only available to you over 72 months. And so that creates a $4,167 monthly benefit for as long as 72 months. So that's pretty amazing that you can go to a 75-year-old and tell them that will triple your money for long-term care, right? So what's the catch? Well, the catch is they have $100,000 of your money. And so how many months does it take you before they're into their own pile, right? So that's number one. Okay. Secondarily, for accumulation purposes, we effectively accumulate almost nothing. Really what's happening is this product is getting an interest rate credited, but it's basically being taken away after it's credited to buy the money back guarantee and to buy the long-term care leverage. Funding structures here are generally either the money's inside the savings accounts, as we've already discussed, or they could come from an annuity already that has a very low basis. Okay. When the money comes out for long-term care purposes, it comes out without taxes. And so that's very huge. And we see that this can be a great structure in the right spot. Okay. So where does that take us? Right? We've been about 40 minutes here. What do you do now? You know, if any of this really resonated with you, again, I would be happy to coach you on a one-on-one basis. Please reach out to me directly. If you want specific information on any of these structures, now, by the way, I just cherry-picked 4 of the structures. Understand that there's a couple more, and there's certainly a number of carriers that have similar structures. And so part of being independent here at USAdvisors is we're not married, if you will, to any carriers. We just might have our favorites in the sweet spots of the niches that they play. Okay? If you know that this is important, but you don't want to either learn it or you don't want to engage in these kind of conversations, we'd be happy to pair you with a long-term care specialist. We're starting to see some success in this area. And to the extent that you want us to pair you with somebody, we can absolutely do that as well. You can see in the big red there that, you know, your biggest risk, really, in my opinion, even though I'm biased as an insurance person, the fact is that most of our clients' biggest risk is the risk of needing care. And as Shane's described, again, it's not just the risk, it's the consequences that occur if that were to happen. And there's nobody more perfectly positioned than you, in my opinion, to be able to bring this information to them in the right context, show them how they can afford it, and how they can go about doing that. The best part about that is we get to live what I call the platinum rule, which is to the extent we understand and meet our clients' needs, then our needs are met. And so if we help our clients through this, a couple things happen, right? First of all, we really do what's best for them. And we create a safety net for them in the event that something occurs. But guess what else? We drive more revenue to our practice. And you know what else? We actually protect our assets under management. Right? Where do you suppose your clients without long-term care insurance are going to pull money from should they need a long-term care event? And I'm suggesting that some of that money might be coming from your portfolio. And what happens to your AUM and the value of your practice when that happens? What happens if they're pulling down the portfolio in a down market? What does that look like? And so it's for those reasons that I strongly encourage you to either have this conversation directly or partner with somebody and have somebody else have this conversation. With that, I want to thank you for your time and your attention. I want to thank you for your business. I understand that you have choice in where you do business. On behalf of the entire USAdvisors staff, thank you so much. I hope you're having your best year ever. Thank you so much, and make it a great day.